Albert Camus, the man who introduced us the absurdity, died in a car crash in 1960, decades before some of cinema's most profound films were ever made. But there are some movies embody his philosophy so perfectly, it's as if he wrote the scripts himself from beyond the grave. Today, we're diving deep into the mind of one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century to discover which films would have captured his imagination. We'll explore 8 movies that deal with life's fundamental absurdity, the search for meaning in a meaningless world, and the beautiful rebellion of simply choosing to live. Let's start with a movie that perfectly captures what Camus called the eternal return, Groundhog Day from 1993. Now, you might think this Bill Murray comedy is just about a weatherman stuck in a time loop, but it's actually the most brilliant cinematic representation of Camus' philosophy ever created. Phil Connors wakes up every single day to the same meaningless routine, forced to repeat the same absurd existence over and over again. Here's where it gets fascinating. At first, Phil goes through all the stages Camus described. He's confused, then angry, then he tries to escape through hedonism and even attempts suicide multiple times. But here's the kicker: nothing works. He's trapped in the absurd condition of existence, just like all of us. But then something magical happens. Phil stops trying to escape and starts creating his own meaning. He learns piano, helps people, and finds joy in the smallest moments. This is exactly what Camus meant when he wrote about Sisyphus. Remember the Greek king condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity? Camus said we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because the moment he accepts his fate and finds meaning in the struggle itself, he becomes free. Phil Connors becomes the ultimate absurd hero, trapped in meaninglessness, but creating meaning through his choices. But Groundhog Day is just the beginning. Our second film takes us into even darker territory, Synecdoche, New York from 2008. This Charlie Kaufman masterpiece follows a theater director who becomes so obsessed with creating authentic art that he builds a life-sized replica of New York inside a warehouse, casting actors to play everyone in his life, including himself. The brilliance here is how the film captures what Camus called the absurd condition, our desperate need to find meaning and authenticity in a world that offers neither. The protagonist keeps building bigger and more complex representations of reality, but each layer only reveals more emptiness. It's like looking into a mirror reflecting another mirror, infinite recursion leading nowhere. Camus would have been fascinated by how the film shows the absurdity of our attempt to capture life through art. The director thinks if he can just be authentic enough, honest enough, real enough, he'll find the meaning he's searching for. But the harder he tries, the further he gets from actual living. It's a perfect illustration of what Camus warned against, losing yourself in the search for meaning instead of simply living. Now, let's shift gears to a film that might surprise you, Being There from 1979. Peter Sellers plays Chance, a simple gardener whose profound ignorance is mistaken for deep wisdom by everyone around him. Here's what makes this a perfect Camus film. Chance never tries to be anything other than what he is. He doesn't search for meaning or struggle with existential questions. He simply exists, and somehow this pure existence becomes meaningful to others. This connects to Camus' idea of the innocent, someone who lives without the burden of consciousness about life's absurdity. Chance represents what we might be if we could strip away all our anxieties about meaning and purpose. He's not trying to be profound, he just is. And paradoxically, this makes him the most authentic character in a world full of people desperately trying to appear meaningful. But perhaps no film captures the essence of Camus' philosophy more perfectly than our fourth selection, a single scene from Closely Watched Trains. Throughout the entire film, we follow Miloš, a passive, awkward teenager obsessed with sex and approval. He's the definition of an ordinary person living an ordinary life. But in the final scene, something extraordinary happens. Miloš makes a split-second decision to sabotage a Nazi train. He plants a bomb on a bridge, succeeds in his mission, but dies in the process. Here's why this scene is pure Camus. This unremarkable young man suddenly creates meaning through a single act of rebellion. He doesn't do it for glory or recognition. He does it because, in that moment, he chooses to act. This is the absurd hero in action. Not a superhero or a traditional warrior, but an ordinary person who, faced with the meaninglessness of existence, chooses to create meaning through action. Miloš transforms from a passive observer to an active participant in his own story. Camus would have loved how the film shows that heroism isn't about being special. It's about choosing to act when action matters. Our fifth film, Ikiru from 1952, takes this concept even further. An aging bureaucrat discovers he has stomach cancer and realizes he's wasted his entire life on meaningless paperwork. Instead of despair, he chooses to build a playground in a slum. It's a small act, seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it becomes his rebellion against meaninglessness. What makes this perfectly Camusian is that the protagonist doesn't seek some grand cosmic purpose. He finds meaning in a simple, concrete action that helps others. It's not about changing the world, it's about changing one small corner of it. This is the absurd hero's response to meaninglessness. Not to find the meaning of life, but to create meaning through living. But if we want to see the purest cinematic adaptation of Camus' myth of Sisyphus, we need to look at Woman in the Dunes from 1964. A man studying sand dunes falls into a pit where a woman lives, constantly shoveling sand to prevent their house from being buried. At first, he desperately tries to escape, but gradually, he begins to find purpose in the endless, meaningless task. This is Sisyphus on screen. The man is literally pushing sand up slopes, knowing it will fall back down, just like the mythical king pushing his boulder. But here's the beautiful part. He eventually chooses to stay. Not because he's given up, but because he's found meaning in the struggle itself. He's discovered water in the sand, a small victory that makes the endless task worthwhile. Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy because he's fully conscious of his condition and chooses to embrace it anyway. The protagonist of Woman in the Dunes reaches this exact realization. The absurd task becomes a form of meditation, a way of being fully present in the moment, rather than always looking for escape. Now let's talk about a film that perfectly captures what Camus called the benign indifference of the universe. No Country for Old Men from 2007. Anton Chigurh, with his coin-flipping ritual, embodies the random, meaningless nature of fate. People live or die based on pure chance, and the universe doesn't care either way. But here's where it gets interesting. The characters who survive are those who accept this randomness without trying to impose meaning on it. They don't ask, "Why me?" or search for cosmic justice. They simply adapt to the reality of an indifferent world. This is classic Camus, acknowledging the absurd condition without succumbing to despair or false hope. Our final film, Notte from 1961, shows us the emptiness that Camus wrote about in The Stranger. We follow a couple wandering through Milan, going through the motions of their relationship and social obligations, but feeling nothing. The film captures that sense of disconnection, of being a stranger in your own life. What makes this a perfect Camus film is how it presents this emptiness without judgment. The characters aren't seeking redemption or transformation. They're simply existing in a state of emotional numbness, and the film suggests this might be a valid response to modern life. Sometimes being a stranger to yourself and others isn't a problem to be solved, it's just a condition to be acknowledged. These 8 films, created across different decades and cultures, all independently arrived at the same philosophical conclusions that Camus reached through pure thought. Life is absurd, and the universe doesn't care about us. There's no predetermined meaning or purpose. But that doesn't mean we should despair or give up. Instead, we should embrace the absurdity and create our own meaning through authentic living. Thanks for watching.